Mr. Raghavan, you get 15 minutes and 5 minutes for question and answer after that. Thank you.
First of all, my sincere apologies. I was genuinely under the impression that this session was at 2:30. I'm deeply apologetic. I'm sorry. uh, the topic that's been assigned to me about the challenges of an inward-looking world, um, really the first question is whether the world is in fact looking inwards. And it really depends on which part of the world you're looking at. Some parts are looking inwards, like Europe, perhaps, but certainly Asia is not. And therefore, to the extent that Asia and Europe interact with each other economically, politically, other ways of interaction, there is a challenge. There is a challenge in as much as what is the extent to which intra-Asian interaction, economic or otherwise, can sustain itself and for how long? And can you really, given the needs of Asia for both capital and technology, if Europe and the USA to a lesser extent, but if Europe decides to start gazing at its navel, what are we going to do? Within this, I suppose that within this overall kind of global preoccupation with your own domestic concerns or regional concerns, another problem that has arisen is these emergence of what you might call, or what are called, in fact, these trading blocks. And there's been talk of monetary union, and there's other sorts of things which those of you who have read George Orwell's 1984 and remember that he creates three constructs of Oceania, Eurasia, and one more. And these are really three competing but fluid entities in that they keep changing alliances with each other, but there are three major entities which compete with each other for whatever there is to compete about, mostly natural resources and so on, and markets. In that, what happened? I mean, the thing really is, are we moving in that direction? That there's a clearly defined group, which is Europe, there's a clearly defined group, which is Asia, and there's a clearly defined group, which is the USA. So what's going to happen over say, the next 25 years? Now, if you look at the period just before 2008, the world was moving fairly rapidly in that direction. There was a huge amount of momentum for regional blocks of one sort or the other, including, as I said, some sort of a call, which I think the Japanese scuttled about an Asian monetary union and so on. Not that it was going to happen very quickly, but there it was. The IMF also played its role in scuttling it. But once the global economy revives, and once the power balances shift even more decisively in favor of Asia, the real question is going to be, how will Europe and the US respond? This, to my mind, is going to be one of the big challenges in the next 25 years, because the Europeans and the Americans, the Western Hemisphere, as a sort of, if you like, they have an enormous advantage at the moment on both capital and technology. The advantage on capital is getting eroded, but the advantage on technology is not going to go away. So capital without technology is only used for trading. It's not for much use otherwise, which has been the sorry story of Asia throughout the last 500, 600 years. So the challenge that the Asian countries would face is in trying to devise methods which would enable them to acquire Western technology on terms that are not unfavorable to them, if not necessarily favorable to them. That's on the economic side, about which I know a little bit. But there are two other types of inward-looking behavior which one might possibly think of. One is political. Part of it, or a very large part of it, is driven by simply domestic political considerations. At the recent G20 meeting in Los Cabos, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh told one of the European leaders that, look, why don't you help the Greeks out? And in return, the response came, but I can, but I will lose the next election. So that sort of inwardness is in any case inbuilt into the democratic, electoral democratic structures that we've all adopted. So the prioritizing is your own election, your party's election, and then survival in office, which we have seen quite nicely in the case of Sonia Gandhi and Manmohan Singh. But there is another form of political introversion, which is a refusal to take part in, take an active part or engage yourself very actively and intensely in matters of, how do I put it? All right, I think I use an example. I mean, if you have China as a possible country which, given its structure of governance, given the fact that the Communist Party of China will not want to give up power, China is the country which is most likely to indulge in aggressive methods, including war, to acquire natural resources. Now, how do you contain China? Or how do you contain any country which is like China, which indulges in behavior like that? Now, that requires a certain amount of politicking and politics amongst nations. And one can see a situation where a preoccupation with your own domestic concerns simply doesn't leave you the energy to, even if the willingness is there, you don't have the energy to engage in these matters to any great extent, so that it's left to a few countries to deal with the problem. And that's not a good thing, but that could happen partly because of, as I said, some amount of lack of energy and some amount of dependence on China for X, Y, Z things. But possibly the worst aspect of this kind of introversion that we might be witnessing is the social bit. I mean, Facebook and so on quite aside, you know, throughout history, in the last 2,000 years, the last 50 or not even 50, I would imagine from about 1985 onwards, last 27 years are the first time that the world has seen an excess supply both of labor and capital. The excess supply of labor is because of population issues. We are all familiar with that. Except in Europe, there is an excess supply of labor. But the excess supply of capital is because of the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system, which had a gold as a kind of anchor for creating global currencies. When that control went, the United States became completely free to print its own dollars. And given its technological superiority and its military might and the sheer vibrancy of its economy, the dollar has emerged as the signature currency of the world. Everybody thought that the the euro would replace it, or the Chinese had some pipe dreams about, the won replacing it. It's not going to happen for a long, long time. Just to give you a simple fact, that the decline of the British power actually began in 1870 when the Germans defeated the French and emerged as the major European power. And the effects of that were felt on the exchange rates of the pound sterling and so on. But it took 75 years, 2 world wars to dethrone the pound. And the reason was simply British technological superiority, British access to markets in their colonies, and British military might. 1945 saw an end to all that, and the pound went. So the dollar is not going anywhere. It's right there. Now, in a situation like this, where there is an excess supply of capital because there is absolutely nothing which constrains the US government from going for QE1, QE2, QE3, QE4. They can go on printing notes. The allocation of this capital has resulted in huge amounts of disruption in other economies. The question is, that in the context of inward-looking behavior, if it's all right for capital to be fully mobile in this fashion, why is it not all right for labor to be fully mobile in this fashion? And of course, the Europeans are the worst culprits here. They have all kinds of hang-ups. But this is going to be a problem. I'll conclude with one very frightening thought. Someone said in the morning that we think about poverty only when we are in five-star environments, which is absolutely true. We have a workforce of 650 or 680 million people. Workforce means people who are able and willing to work. Whatever we do, however hard we try, and at the end of the day, when everything falls into place and everything is ticking along splendidly, we will probably be able to provide organized sector employment to 100 million people. That would become possible if Chinese manufacturing employment declined, which it's not going to decline. Now, if China were to attain its target of manufacturing employment of 120 million people, what that would mean in effect is factories all over the rest of the world would close down. There is no way that there would be any room for anybody to produce anything if the Chinese went up from their current 45 or 50 million people employed in industrial employment up to 100, 120 million. Now, in India, you forget about China, in India, if out of the 650 million people, we are going to be able to provide employment only to 100 million people, employment being defined as a job which you go to the office at 9 o'clock or go to your factory at 9 o'clock and you work for 8 hours, and at the end of the month, you are paid a certain amount of salary, which is fixed by contractual terms. There is an obligation to work, and there is an obligation to pay fixed amounts. That's the key thing. What is going to happen to the rest of the 500 million people? What are they going to do? This is the kind of, I see my friend, he's probably forgotten me, we were classmates in Delhi School of Economics, P.K. Mishra, Raul Prabish, talking about immiserization and so on, which we were forced to learn. But this is exactly what's going to happen. The labor market in India is going to become a very flexible one, which means wages are going to go lower and lower. In fact, in the last 10 years, real wages haven't gone up. The reason why employment also has not gone up is because informal sector employment has gone up. And by informal sector, I simply mean that you don't have a right to attend office every day. You're not covered by the Industrial Disputes Act or whatever act there is. We are in for a very low wage equilibrium where standards of living are going to be very, very low. You've got to stop dreaming about the kind of, and Harry was absolutely right about the thing that he showed yesterday, that you're not going to attain those European and American standards of living. It's a pipe dream, and probably shouldn't also. So we've got a social problem of excess labor which we cannot absorb. Europe has a social labor problem of shortage of labor, but which it prefers to live with in spite of high wages and low productivity and low competitiveness. The United States is midway, but the United States has Mexico to tap, and the Mexicans have the United States to leap over into. So that part is all right, they're taken care of. There's China, there's Africa. I'll stop there because I think I've completed my 15 minutes. I'm told the other person is not coming, so I shouldn't feel so guilty about having come late. Once again, my apologies.
What's your reaction on one? How much more can we stretch as a country in terms of giving employment here? Secondly, what do you see in terms of mass migration of labor, which is in the context of contract farming that starts happening in Africa and other parts? And are we on the same track as the Chinese who, with their aid, with their finance, also export labor with those economic incentives where they participate? And at the end of it, what is the residue in terms of the number of people who will be without jobs? And as a final thing, can you share us up to lunch to tell us exactly what's going to happen to these postcards?
Job, which is, as I said, it's a contractual obligation. That's going to be very difficult. So I think we have to live with a very huge, large number of people who are doing exactly what you said, running small businesses. It's subsistence. Essentially, you're just keeping your head above the water. What they sell might change, but the value of what they sell and the amounts that they sell is going to be roughly the same. Average incomes, I don't know how many people know this in this room, but Pramod would know this because he was Agriculture Secretary. Per hectare, average income in India for a farming family is, after netting out all costs, is 20,000 rupees. In average, it can go up to 24, 25, and this for cereals, and it can be 18, 16, something like that, but it's abysmally low. This, about, if you have a sort of a money order economy of the type you have in Bihar, Eastern UP, you might have a family income in rural areas of about 30, 35,000, 36,000 rupees a month. But it's going to stay there. It's not going to go up. In real terms, in money terms, it will go up, obviously. But in real terms, purchasing power terms, it's going to stay there. So the command over goods and services, typically an Indian family would have for about 500 million people, is going to be roughly the same. And the power sector, yes, absolutely right. Electricity is essential. Everybody must have it. But how much of it are they going to buy? How much of that little mobile phone card do they use? You have villages where 10 people get together and buy one mobile phone and so on. So, I mean, all these problems are there. But it's a low-wage equilibrium. About migration, mass migration, it's not going to happen. It can't take care of these many people. Just simply cannot. At its peak, migration from the UK to the US and other parts of the world was about 1 million, 1.5 million. So it's not a solution. What's going to happen to five-star hotels? They'll stay. We believe in our duality of our civilization and Sarva, what is that thing? Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, let everybody live, and this will be there, that will be there. I don't think there'll be a problem. Someone there.
But that's it. Two more questions, please. Otherwise, we're really going over the top. We don't have to talk about the big questions. So right now, 15 minutes. Go ahead.
Sociologists divide societies broadly into two categories. The vertical society, the extreme example being Japan, and the horizontal society, the extreme example being India. And it's believed that these extreme vertical or horizontal societies find it easier to be inward-looking. Europe and America have always been somewhere more or less near the middle of these two extremes. And it was believed that these middle groups find it very difficult to be inward looking because neither the affinity with the vertical structure is so strong nor the affinity with the horizontal band is so strong. In that context, your hypothesis that it's becoming more inward looking, would it change the old assumptions or what?
Answer is I don't know, but the homogeneity of these societies, it, it plays a very large part in the pattern of their inward or outward looking. When it comes to dealing, I mean, it's become politically incorrect to use these terms, but when they deal with Christian countries, as opposed to Islamic or non-Christian countries, the approach is, and there are some foreign service people here, they'll be able to bear out these prejudices, how they come into play in various kinds of situations. So a very strong glue is the cultural affinity that they have with their own, it's color of skin, religion, capital, trading, links. So within that context, these guys tend to be pretty outward looking. But when it comes to dealing with what they would regard as foreigners, non-white, non-Christian, poor, relative to them, then the attitude changes and they become very inward looking. And that really, that's why I said that we are heading roughly in an Orwellian kind of direction where, these groups will get formed depending on these affinities. Could get formed, not will get formed.
Other guests, please. Mr. Dasgupta, you can interact later because it's just one. Mr. Joginder Singh, sir, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. You have presented a very horrifying picture, but look at Punjab. I think there is a joke which says poverty begins with the lack of Maruti. And there is nobody who's starving on that. Can, whatever be its defects here, drugs and other things are also there in Punjab. Can that model be replicated all over India here? Because Punjab would not be able to sustain itself but for the labor from Bihar, for labor from UP and labor from other states like Jharkhand also. It is not really that bad here. I think we have changed with the times. Maybe where people don't want to work here, a Punjabi gets up in the morning, 4 o'clock, when he's cultivating his field. My late father used to do that. And come back, half day's work will be over by 9 when he'll come and eat his breakfast, lunch and sleep and go again in the evening. So I was only wondering, what is the solution to that? You have said here, there is a position here. People are eating, people are living. Of course, what you said about electricity is right, because what's called kundi, they put a hook and then use this thing here. But this is a problem not peculiar to Punjab. In Delhi itself used to be 40 to 50% till the private sector comes. So you have given us the pose as a problem, give us a solution also. What is the ideal solution? Maybe the state-wise, maybe the country-wise, because everything is not applicable. It depends upon the culture, it depends upon the inclination of the people, and tolerance level also. That's what we'd like to know from you.
Well, all I was saying was, I was saying two things. One, I was not saying that inward migration will stop. Inward migration is a right, constitutional right, and it's not going to stop whatever. And it'll happen whenever the economic circumstances are right. So the problem is not with migration within the country. That'll go on. What I was saying was completely different. What I was saying was that in spite of everything that you do, the living standards of the bulk of this population is going to be very, very low. There is, I hate to do this. You take food. When GDP growth went up, what happened? The guy who was eating 2 chapatis a day, he started eating 3, and you multiply that by 600 million people. He was eating 1 katori of dal, he started eating another half katori of dal. He was consuming a little bit of dahi, perhaps started consuming a full katori of dahi. The multiplicatory effect of this on overall demand for food is enormous. which is why our supply has not been able to keep up with it. Now, there are all kinds of structural difficulties and all kinds of inefficiencies and all kinds of problems. The question you have to ask is that having got rid of everything, having sorted out all the problems of technology application and everything else, are we still going to be able to produce food which is able to feed 3 square meals a day at reasonable prices? The price is the variable. You will produce the food, people will eat. The question is, what is the price they will pay for it? If food prices are going to go up, it's a different kind of deprivation on the people. Let me also tell you this, that our stand at the WTO saying we will not do this, we will not do that, we will not import food grains and so on, it sounds great. And there is a genuine livelihood issue and there's a genuine political issue that you cannot have this. So you think you should not have this. But let me just give you one small statistic. After the Industrial Revolution started in Britain, 1757 or something, if you must put a date on it, but basically that 100 years or 90 years period, starting from 1750s, by the end of the 18th century and in the first 50 years of the 19th century, British food prices had risen by over 500%. The bulk of this increase had taken place in the first 15 years. And that is why there was that great massacre called Peterloo or something like that, and there was a lot of industrial unrest. Which is why, in 1842, they were obliged to reform their corn laws so that wheat from the US could be imported. By 1850, US food prices, inflation had become negative. Since then, UK prices had become negative. UK output of food had, of course, fallen. More land had gone into other sort of things. The fact of the matter is that the United Kingdom was able to feed its people at a reasonable cost through imports. Just one more minute, Maruf. I want to leave you with one more thought, that the problem of food, sir, since you raised the question, can be solved only in one way. And this ties in with your 5-star thing also. That in 50 years from now, given that food is no more than protein and carbohydrates, it will be consumed in the form of tablets as in the spacecraft. So this cooked food, this absolute indulgence and luxury that every poor Indian enjoys, is going to lose that also. He'll buy his food in tablets from the local Kirana store. Thanks, I'm sorry about that.
Thank